Okay, so, our course is called Freedom and American Society. And we have been, for the past several weeks, been discussing the concept of freedom and related important attributes and concepts. But now we want to take a look at the second term in our course, this idea of American society. What is that? Right? When words lose their meaning, people lose their freedom. So we want to be sure we're clear about what we are meaning by using various terms. American, I think, we can put aside for now. Let's talk about this concept of society. Perhaps the best way to approach this is to do it from the point of view of social theorists and how they understand society, especially modern society, such as modern American society. Every society, especially modern society, has what scholars refer to as an institutional structure. Now that's a very big term, institutional structure, but it's actually a very simple concept, and I'll explain it to you. What's an institution? An institution, okay, let's go back to look at it this way. In every society known to man, whether developed or not, people engage in certain habitual actions or practices, as the term usually is. They have certain practices that they routinely perform over and over again. And for example, in every society known to man, the older generation has attempted to pass knowledge on to the younger generation, to educate them. In early societies, such practices are informal and sporadic. They're not organized, systematic. But eventually, with social development, these practices that were once informal become more formalized and organized. And rather than just occasionally passing knowledge on, whether it's through action or through words, people develop schools, right? Which is a place where people go, a formal entity where people go to receive an education. So a practice that is repeatedly performed and that eventually becomes formalized in a recognizable abstract entity such as a school, that's what we call, or what scholars call, an institution. And so modern society is full of different kinds of institutions, that is, practices that people have performed continually over a long period of time that have become recognizable entities in themselves. And importantly, those entities persist over time, generation after generation, despite the fact that the particular people who are participating in them at any given time is continually changing. Let's take the example of Palm Beach Atlantic University. PBA is an institution, it's an educational institution. But PBA existed, it was founded in 1968, and it existed long before any of us, the people who are presently participating at PBA, whether as students or faculty. But PBA existed long before most, if not all of us, were here. But the institution itself was a recognizable entity. And we expect, God willing, that down the road, in future decades and even centuries, the PBA will continue to exist as a recognizable institution, despite the fact that all the people who are involved with PBA right now, today, will be long gone, having moved on or passed away or whatever. The institution remains over time as a recognizable entity, despite the fact that the particular people participating in it is constantly changing. The people who are here today at PBA were not the same people who were here 10 years ago, and they will not be the same people who are here 10 years in the future. So the institution remains as a recognizable entity despite the fact that the participants are constantly changing. So the institutional structure of modern society, we have all kinds of institutions. We have, I already mentioned one important category, educational institutions, anywhere from pre-K to postgraduate school and so forth. But they exist before the present participants were engaged with them, and they will, if they're successful, will continue to exist long after everybody who's there now is gone. So we have educational institutions. Now try to think what other kinds of institutions exist in contemporary American society. I will suggest to you that in the course of our daily life, all of us are constantly moving in and out of various institutional structures. That's how we spend our days. We come to school. All right, what else do we do? Well, most of us, we go to church at least once a week, right? Think about your churches. For most of us, the church that we attend existed before we ourselves or the present congregation was part of that church. And we expect, if the church is successful, that it will continue to exist long after all of us are gone and have moved on to other endeavors or left this world. But the church, think of the Catholic Church, which has been around for several thousand years, despite the fact that the many people who participated in the Catholic Church throughout the centuries, they come and go. They're born and they die, they participate, and so forth, but the church itself remains as a recognizable entity. So, we have educational institutions, we have religious institutions. What else? What other kinds of enduring structures do we participate in? Well, we go to church, we go to school. What else do we do on a daily basis? Most people, not all, but most people, they go to work. Well, think about the organizations and institutions, the business institutions that you participate in. A business institution is a recognizable, abstract entity. Most people, such as, let's say corporations, let's say McDonald's or Starbucks, most of the people who are working there right now, today, are not the same people who were working there 20 years ago. And they probably will not be the same people who are working there 20 years from now. The institution remains as a recognizable entity, despite the fact that the particular employees and staff who are there today were not there before and will not be there in the future. The institution itself remains. And think of all the numerous business institutions. What unites them all is that all of them are there in order to make a profit. That's what makes something a business institution. So we have, Bank of America, McDonald's, Starbucks, Amazon, Walmart, mom and pop grocery store. They're recognizable entities that continue to endure over time, despite the fact that the particular participants in them are constantly changing. Okay, so we go to church, we go to school, we go to work. There's another large category of institutions, generally called there were people organized together to pursue certain common interests, but their goal is not to make a profit. It's something else. We call these nonprofit institutions. For example, here in West Palm, the Peggy Adams Animal Welfare League. These are people who came together because their mission is to help animals. They're not there to make a profit, but to help the animals, but they find that organizing together facilitates that purpose. But the people who are working at Peggy Adams today are not the same people who were there when it was founded, and they probably, are not the same people who will be there in 50 years should the shelter continue to exist. Same thing for the Red Cross, amateur sports leagues, bowling leagues, stamp collectors clubs. Think of all the things that people join, not to make a profit, but because they share common interests. But the entity, the Red Cross, existed long before the people who are there today joined the Red Cross, and we think if it endures, it will be that they will all be long gone, while the institution of the Red Cross continues to exist. So you'll see, we weave all day long. We weave in and out of various institutional structures. As I said, we go to church, we go to school, we go to work, we go to various clubs that we belong to. And there's one other institution that's usually highlighted here, and it's one that we don't usually think of as an institution, but in fact it is. In fact, it's the rock bed institution of every society known to man, and that is what we call the family. Think about the family. The family as a recognizable entity has been around in every society known to man from the beginning of, as far back as we can go in human history. There have been a biological male, a biological female who have biological children, and they constitute a family. Now, the institution of family has remained a steady feature of all societies for thousands of years, 5,000 years at the very least, despite the fact that the particular families who are alive at any point in time is constantly changing. The families that are alive today were not around last century, the century before. They won't be here the century from now, the particular people in your family. But the family itself as a concept continues to exist despite the fact that the particular people forming a family is constantly changing. Think of your own family. I'll think of mine, the Rader family. Now, who do we include in their family? Yes, I have the people who are alive today, my mother, my sisters, my nieces, my nephews, my brother, and so forth. But also in my family are all those people who came before me who are no longer, who have passed away. My father passed away a few years ago, but he is certainly still part of my family. And the unborn children of my nieces and nephews, they will be part of my family despite the fact that they aren't yet born. So the concept of the Rader family exists over time, despite the fact that the particular people participating in it at any given time is constantly changing, birth and death and marriage and so forth. So the family is a social institution in this respect. Now, this institutional structure, so this is how we spend our day in a free society. We go to church, we go to school, we go to work, we're with our families, we go to clubs and so forth. And all of these institutions together constitute a particular segment of society. Society is the big concept. Within that, we have all of these institutions that are united by certain attributes. They all have two things in common. Now, what are they? With the exception of the family, let's put that aside for a moment. But what do institutions such as your churches, your schools, the businesses you work for, the clubs you join, what do they have in common? They have two attributes, a moral attribute and a practical attribute. The moral attribute, which is the most important for our discussion of freedom, is that all of these institutions are voluntary associations in a free society. Can anybody force you in our society to join a particular church or prevent you from leaving a congregation if you want to? No. Your decision to attend or not attend a particular church is voluntary. Can anybody force you to work for a particular business against your will or to prevent you from quitting if you want to? No, that's slavery. It's outlawed. Your choice to work somewhere is voluntary, a voluntary choice, or your choice to quit. Nonprofit institutions. Can anybody force you to contribute to Peggy Adams Welfare League or contribute to the Red Cross? No. If you do participate, it's a voluntary decision on your part. Schools, with the exception of government schools, which we'll put aside, can anybody force you to come to PBA or prevent you from leaving if you want to? No. It's a voluntary decision on your part. Now, the family is often included in this group, but it's slightly different. Obviously, we don't voluntarily choose our families at the outset. But once you reach the age of maturity, I think the legal age is 18, I think, if for some reason, God forbid, you choose that you no longer want to participate and be part of your family, you can leave, and your parents can't call the police and they drag you back, right? You are free. So any engagement you have with your family after the age of legal maturity is a voluntary action on your part. So what all these institutions have in common, our churches, our schools, our businesses, our clubs, even our family after a certain point, they are voluntary associations. In order to account for the fact that the family is not completely voluntary, sometimes scholars will call the family a natural association. So altogether, this segment of society adds up the natural and voluntary associations in society. This is such a famous part of the free society that it has a name. This is what scholars call civil society. Civil society, again, consists of the natural and voluntary associations in society. Now, we said each of them are united by two attributes. First of all and foremost, the moral attribute, they're all voluntary. This is the free sector of society, where nobody can force you to participate in any of these institutions. They're also united by another attribute, a practical one. And to give you a hint what that is, let me ask you, who pays for these voluntary associations? Who pays for the expenses of PBA? Who pays for your family's expenses? Who pays for the expenses of your church? Who pays for the expenses at McDonald's or Starbucks? Who pays for the expenses at the Red Cross or Peggy Adams Welfare League? And what's the answer? Who pays for them? The answer is only those people who voluntarily choose to participate in them pay for them. Nobody else is forced to contribute to their expenses. Who pays for the expenses of PBA? pays my salary? Who pays for the electricity? Who pays for the staff everywhere, for all the administration and the faculty and everything else? Well, the people who choose to participate in PBA, and more particularly, you, the students, right? Your tuition is used then to cover all the various expenses at PBA. That's how it's paid for. And no one is forced to pay for the expenses of PBA. Only those people who choose to attend PBA pay. Who pays for the expenses at your church? The members of the congregation. Nobody outside the congregation is forced to contribute to pay for the expenses of your church. It is the people who voluntarily choose to attend who also contribute to pay for the expenses of your church expenses. Who pays for the expenses at McDonald's or Starbucks? Now, I don't eat at either place. I don't have to pay for them, and I don't. But who pays for their expenses? Who pays for the labor, for the inputs into their product, for their operating costs, and all the rest of it? Things cost money. Well, the people who pays for that are those people who voluntarily choose to participate in McDonald's or Starbucks. Every time you buy some French fries at McDonald's, that money that revenue is being used to pay for the expenses incurred by McDonald's in producing those French fries. So only the people who choose to participate voluntarily, freely, pay for the expenses of the institutions in civil society. So as we said, they're united. Institutions of civil society are united because they all possess two common attributes. First of all, they're all free or voluntary. Nobody can force you to participate. And secondly, they're paid for by the people who voluntarily choose to participate. Nobody outside can be forced to pay for the expenses of McDonald's or Starbucks or PBA, or your family for that matter, right? The breadwinner of the family pays for the expenses. This is why the civil society is sometimes called the private sector. The term private sector refers to the fact that who pays for these institutions? The private people who voluntarily choose to participate in them. So this is civil society, and in a free society, this is the largest part of society. Most of our lives in a free society are spent voluntarily choosing which institutions to deal with, and they're paid for by the people who do, in fact, voluntarily choose to participate in them. That's what it means. They're free or voluntary. We've seen that those words are synonymous. But civil society, or the private sector, is not 100% of all of society. There's another sector that we haven't discussed yet. And that sector is sometimes misleadingly called the public sector. More accurately, what is it? That is the government sector. And that's different in kind from the private sector of civil society.